Captain Mitchell's final log entry will likely mention the derelict. It will call it an opportunity, a historic find. It will be recorded in his calm, authoritative baritone, the one he uses for official reports and company-mandated announcements. He will phrase it in a way that sounds like calculated, acceptable risk. I will call it a mistake. The Karen is a cargo hauler, registration 719 Victor, a long-haul freighter owned by Magnus Interstellar. Magnus is the kind of company that values tonnage over talent, which is how a xenobiologist like me ends up as a ship's medic on a 20-year-old boat hauling refined helium to the outer colonies. My job is to patch up zero-G burns and dispense meds for bone density loss. My real job is to stay out of the way. I was doing it perfectly until 3 hours ago. That's when the ping came, a repeating signal from a dead spot in the Oort cloud where nothing should be. The bridge of the Karen isn't a place for command, not really. It's a cockpit designed for a two-man crew and a lot of automation, but Mitchell makes it his throne room. He stood now with his back to me, hands clasped behind him. A statue poured into his impeccably pressed uniform. He was a man 2 years from a pension and terrified of it. He saw the image on the main screen, a long, tumbling shard, and saw his name in a history book. "Look at it, Doctor," he said, his voice humming with a zeal I hadn't heard in 5 years. "A non-human vessel, adrift, no life signs, this is history." "It's a ghost signal in the middle of nowhere," I replied. "The last thing you show an ambitious man is fear. It just makes him feel more courageous. It's a variable we can't account for." Mitchell turned, and his eyes, usually a placid grey, had a dangerous fire in them. "The variable is a salvage claim that will make this entire company's decade. The risk is that someone else finds it first." I didn't need to see the risk. I could feel it, a spot in my gut that had been there for 10 years. "Bridge," Mitchell's voice boomed, cutting off any further protest. "Walsh, Schmidt, Sorensen, ja, my location, now." One by one, they filed in. Mark Walsh, our security chief, materialized in the doorway first. He was a solid block of a man with a shaved head and a jaw that looked like it could crush rocks. He was the kind of security officer shipping companies hired after they got tired of pirates. A human deterrent. He'd washed out of the Martian colonial security force years ago. Not for failing, but for succeeding too brutally. Leo Schmidt was already there, hunched over a secondary console, his face bathed in the amber glow of diagnostic screens. He was our engineer, a man who spoke the ship's language of power fluctuations and pressure groans better than he spoke to people. If the ship had a soul, it lived in Leo's toolkit. Then came Samir Jah, the kid on his first deep space contract, who stood near the hatch looking like he was trying to take up as little space as possible. He was 19, a junior cargo handler sending every credit home to a sick sister on Earth. He clutched his personal datapad like a prayer book, his wide eyes fixed on Mitchell, waiting for an order. Any order. Last was Peter Sorensen, the ship's cook, who leaned against the bulkhead with the stillness of a man who spent his life waiting for water to boil. Peter was the quiet center of the crew, a man whose galley served as a confessional. He just watched, reading the room like one of his recipes. "Gentlemen," Mitchell began, his chest puffed with the weight of the moment. "What you see here is a salvage opportunity of unprecedented scale. We will be boarding to assess its value and secure our claim." A collective intake of breath. Only Walsh looked pleased. "Captain," I said, stepping forward, "I must object, officially. We have no idea what's on that ship, why it's adrift, or what happened to its crew. Protocol in this situation is to log, report, and withdraw. Your recommendation is noted, Doctor, and filed." Mitchell's voice was dismissive. "But I am the captain. My name is on the manifest. We will take every precaution. Walsh, you're with me. Leo, you're on my team. I need an expert eye on their engineering. Doctor, I want a medical opinion on any remains. Sorensen, you'll help with gear. Samir, you're with him. We board at 1300 hours." I didn't argue further. I'd seen this kind of ambition before. It had a name. It had a file designation. The Kepler 186F Extremophile Catastrophe. It had a body count. 3 colleagues, 1 mentor. It had my name all over it. I had spent a decade running from that kind of certainty. The absolute conviction that you can control the variables. And just like that, the mistake was ratified. It had a mission time. The crossing felt like stepping from one reality into another. The Charon's docking collar, a piece of loud utilitarian machinery, clanked and hissed as it sealed against the derelict's hull. When the outer door irised open, it did so without a sound, peeling back in segments like the pupil of a vast mechanical eye. A wash of light from our helmets spilled into the opening. My suit's external sensors immediately registered the environment, the data scrolling in the corner of my vision. Pressure, stable, close to 1 standard atmosphere. Gravity, 1.01 G. The composition was a near-perfect nitrogen-oxygen mix, but flagged with a trace contaminant my suit's library couldn't identify. There was air in here, and gravity, on a dead ship. That was the first thing that was fundamentally wrong. "Helm cams on," Mitchell commanded, his voice a clean signal in my ear. A little blue light flickered to life on his helmet and then on Walsh's and mine. The deck plating was firm under my magnetic boots. I could feel the solid, reassuring pull of a standard gravity field, a sensation at odds with the powerless nature of the vessel. The corridor before us was a tunnel. The walls were a seamless, pale material that looked like bone, curving upward to a vaulted ceiling. There were no visible pipes, conduits, or access panels. We moved forward, the sharp clang of our boots on the deck relayed through our suit microphones. Walsh took point, his pulse rifle held in a low, ready position, its tactical light cutting a nervous beam into the dark. I followed, with Mitchell right behind me, then a wide-eyed Samir sticking close to Peter. "Look at this construction," Mitchell murmured. He ran a gloved hand along the wall. No seams, not a single weld. The value in the alloys alone. "It's a fatal funnel, Captain," Walsh cut in, his focus purely tactical. "No cover. We need to find a junction." I wasn't thinking about alloys or funnels. I was looking at the walls. The temperature outside my suit was just above freezing, yet there was no condensation, no trace of ice. The atmospheric processors, a high-energy system on any human ship, had to be functional on some level. Another piece that didn't fit. We moved deeper, our lights carving up the darkness. The ship's layout was intentionally disorienting. Hallways bent, and doorways were never where you expected them to be. We passed several more of the silent iris doors, each one sealed tight. Then Walsh held up a fist, his bootfalls ceasing. He was standing before an opening larger than the others, a great archway that led into a space of mind-warping scale. The beams of our lights shot into it and were swallowed whole. "Moving in," Walsh announced, and we followed him onto a narrow catwalk. The space was a cavern, a vast, multi-tiered cylinder that plunged down into darkness and rose up further than our lights could reach. And it was filled with pods. Thousands of them, tens of thousands. They were arrayed in spiraling tiers, honeycomb cells climbing the walls like a colossal beehive made of crystal and steel. Each pod was large enough to hold a man, or something much larger, and every single one of them was shattered. The damage was uniform, and it was horrific. The crystalline fronts had been blown out. Shards of the stuff, some as long as my arm, littered the metal catwalks. We moved to the nearest pod. The inside was slick with a dried, brownish residue, and deep, gouging scratches scarred the interior plating. Whatever was in there had wanted out. Badly. "My God!" Samir's voice came through the comms, a whisper that was unnervingly intimate in the confines of my helmet. Mitchell was speechless for a moment, his light playing across row after row of empty, violated cells. This wasn't a crew," This was cargo, a menagerie, a zoo. A prison, Walsh corrected. He knelt, shining his light on a section of deck plating that was warped and melted, the edges curled up like burnt paper. Looks like some kind of chemical agent. Acid, maybe. They fought each other. They fought the ship. He stood up, his rifle sweeping the dark abyss below. They're loose. All of them. A prison riot. 1,000 different species from 1,000 different worlds, all let loose at once in a contained environment. The sheer number of variables, the catastrophic failure of a closed ecosystem. It was Kepler 186f all over again, but on a scale I couldn't have imagined. I could feel a tremor in my hands and willed it to stop. Peter Sorensen, who had been silent until now, stepped up beside me, his gaze sweeping the broken glass and silent screams. He looked up at the endless tiers of empty cells, then down into the blackness that waited below. "This isn't a zoo, Captain," he said, his voice a reverent tone that carried across our private channel. "It's Golgotha." Mitchell's voice cut through. "The bridge, it has to be this way. All capital ships are designed with a direct path from command to primary cargo or containment. Let's move." He led us out of the Golgotha, away from 1,000,000 broken pods. We followed a main artery of the ship, a grand, arching tunnel that, unlike the others, seemed designed for presence and authority. The floor beneath our boots was a darker, almost obsidian material, and the bone-white walls were inlaid with inert, filigreed patterns that absorbed our helmet lights, giving nothing back. It was a funeral procession route. We found the command center at the end of it. The entrance was another massive iris, but this one was sealed open, its metallic petals frozen in a state of permanent welcome. Inside the space was a dome, a planetarium of dead technology. Consoles swept around a central point, their surfaces dark and smooth, no buttons or switches visible. The front of the dome was a single, immense view screen, now black as pitch, showing us only our own faint reflections. And in the center of it all was the throne. It wasn't just a chair. It was a command station, a life support system, and a tomb, all integrated into a single, terrifying structure that rose from the deck. This was the heart of the ship's power. A massive shard of metal, a piece of the ship's own superstructure, had been driven down through the throne's back and through the creature sitting in it. This was the ship's master, the warden of this prison. Even pinned there and long dead, its sheer size was imposing. It was an insectoid, but that word is insultingly simple. The corpse had desiccated over time, its body a complex arrangement of black chitinous plates, segmented and overlapping like a knight's armor, now dull and brittle-looking. 2 of its 4 primary limbs were still fused to the throne's controls, long, scythe-like arms ending in delicate, multi-jointed fingers. The other 2 were splayed out, limp in death. Its head was a triangular casque, its face a cluster of unblinking compound eyes, now clouded and milky, like shattered obsidian. It would have been a terrifying creature in life. In death, it was a monument to a final, desperate struggle. A massive shard of metal, a piece of the ship's own superstructure, had been driven down through its thorax, pinning it to the back of the throne. Its own dark, viscous blood, now hardened to black resin, coated the entry wound. "Hostile neutralized," Walsh stated, his voice a professional assessment. He swept his rifle's light over the corpse. "Did a hell of a job. Looks like one of the prisoners got lucky, or was very, very strong." "This confirms it," Mitchell said. "The cargo got loose, killed the captain, and then tore each other apart. The threat is over. All that's left is cleanup." He looked around the bridge, already calculating salvage rights. He saw a dead king and an empty kingdom, his for the taking. I saw something else. I saw a creature impaled by a piece of its own ship. It looked less like a murder and more like an execution, or a workplace accident. My suit's chronometer showed we'd been aboard for nearly an hour. The stale certainty in the room felt premature, dangerous. I was about to voice this, to suggest we retreat and reevaluate, when the universe decided to do it for me. It started as a vibration in the soles of my boots. The deck plates began to thrum, like a great beast stirring from a long slumber. "What is that?" Mitchell snapped. "Leo, report." Leo Schmidt, our engineer, was already staring at the consoles. "It's a purge. The system's failing. It's a death rattle." A deep, grinding groan filled the air, a sound less like machinery and more like tectonic plates shifting. The amber lights on the consoles all flashed red at once, and the iris door leading into the command center began to constrict. "The door," Samir said. "It's closing." "Hold it," Walsh ordered, pointlessly aiming his rifle at the mechanism. The iris contracted with a sickening crunch of metal on metal, the segments locking together with a permanence that suggested they would never open again. We were sealed inside the command deck. "Find another way out," Mitchell commanded. "There must be a secondary exit." We fanned out, our lights sweeping across the smooth, featureless dome, but found nothing. The groaning intensified. The whole ship shuddered. Through the massive, dead view screen, we watched in horror as a bulkhead of dark metal slid out from the right side of the main hall, completely sealing off the path back to the airlock. It connected with the far wall with a resonant thoom. One door had locked behind us, and another had blocked our retreat. Then, just as despair began to set in, a section of the curved wall behind the dead king's throne began to retract. With a low grinding sound, it slid away, revealing a dark, narrow tunnel. The ship was herding us. Our only path forward was deeper, into the unknown. We took the new opening, following a tunnel that branched away from the command deck. For a while, the ship remained consistent, cold, silent, and architecturally alien. The only change was in my suit's HUD. The external temperature was climbing. Slowly at first, a degree, then 2. Insignificant, then it ticked up faster. "My suit's heat exchangers are kicking in," I announced. "Something up ahead is generating significant warmth." "A power source," Mitchell said, a hopeful edge to his voice. "The engineering section. Stay sharp." The texture of the deck began to change. The hard, obsidian-like plating gave way to something with a slight give to it, like hard rubber. A thin, slick film coated its surface, and our mag boots, no longer getting a clean magnetic purchase, squelched with each step. The air, according to my sensors, was becoming humid. We turned a corner and stopped dead. The corridor ahead of us was a gullet. The bone-white walls were gone, replaced by a dark membrane that shone with a wet organic luster in our helmet lights. It was ribbed, like the inside of a snake, and it moved with a rhythmic contraction that was almost too subtle to see. The temperature here was tropical. A bass-heavy thrumming vibrated through the floor. "What in the hell?" Mitchell said. Walsh took a step forward, his rifle aimed into the fleshy tunnel. "It's a contamination. Some kind of biological growth." He scraped the wall with the barrel of his gun. The membrane puckered, weeping a clear, viscous fluid. "We find a way around." "There is no way around," I said, my own light tracing the walls. "The transformation. It's the ship itself." My mind raced, trying to form a theory. A defense mechanism? A terraforming process? It made no sense. "I don't care what it is," Mitchell said. "Is it hostile?" Before I could answer, Samir made a choked sound. "Doc, look." He pointed a trembling finger at the wall to his left. "The patterns." I followed his light. The fleshy membrane was not uniform. It was mottled, lumpy, covered in shapes and ridges that I had dismissed as random. But Samir was right. They weren't random. I took a step closer. I could see it now, a shape embedded in the wall, half-formed, like a face pressed into wet clay. It was vaguely reptilian, with a long snout and vacant, staring pits for eyes. Next to it was another, this one mammalian, its features twisted in what looked like a scream, and another. The entire corridor was a bas-relief of alien faces, thousands of them, all frozen in a gallery of agony. It's them! Peter's voice was a horrified hush. The creatures from the pods! They're in the walls! That was when I saw the eyes. Not all of them were empty sockets. Some were still intact. Crystalline lenses, multifaceted insectoid orbs, dark milky globes. They were open, staring. It's watching us, Samir whispered. I turned my head to follow his gaze. He was pointing at a single, large obsidian eye embedded low on the wall, and as I watched, the eye swiveled in its socket to look directly at me. I jerked my light down the corridor, and it happened everywhere. Dozens, then hundreds of alien eyes, all turning in perfect unison. They left the far wall, they left the ceiling, and they fixed on us. We were the most interesting thing to happen in this fleshy hallway in a very long time. Peter took a half step back, making the sign of the cross on his chest plate, a gesture I hadn't seen him use before. Walsh simply raised his pulse rifle and aimed it at the nearest staring eye. "Don't!" I said, my voice coming out as a croak. But the most terrifying reaction came from Captain Mitchell. He stared at the wall of silent witnesses. For the first time, he had no orders to give. He was just a man in a cage, being watched by the walls. Walsh ignored my warning. He took a half step forward, his pulse rifle leveling on the nearest largest eye. If it can see, it can be blinded. A blur of motion erupted from a darkened side passage to our left. It was an explosion of grey hide and coiled muscle. There was a sound, a rapid series of high-frequency clicks broadcast over our external speakers, too fast for the human ear to properly pass. The creature was quadrupedal and sinewy, sliding through space like muscle poured into motion. It had no visible eyes, just a smooth, featureless head atop a powerful neck. Its maw unhinged, splitting its face into a nightmarish flower of needle-like teeth. "Contact," Walsh said, his training kicking in. He fired a 3-round burst from his rifle, the pulses of superheated plasma striking the creature's flank. It shrieked, a high-pitched sound that overloaded our comms with static, and recoiled. But the wounds sizzled and smoked without slowing it down. It dodged Walsh's next burst and launched itself at the weakest member of our group, Samir. The boy cried out, stumbling backward as the thing descended on him. Peter was there, shoving Samir behind him, raising a heavy toolkit like a club. It was a gesture of such futile, parental bravery that my breath caught in my throat. The thing swatted the toolkit aside with a casual swipe of a clawed forelimb, sending it clattering across the deck. Before it could close its jaws on Peter, Walsh was on it, slamming the butt of his rifle into its side. The creature whipped around, its attention now fixed on the immediate threat. "Mitchell, get them back!" I shouted, my own medical training taking over. I pulled Samir behind me, my hands scanning his suit's diagnostic panel. No breaches. He was just terrified. "Its movements are too fast. Don't let it get flanked." The fight was a spiral of violence. The creature was feral and lightning fast, using the walls and even the ceiling to bound and weave around Walsh's shots. Mitchell fired his sidearm, the smaller plasma bolt searing streaks across the fleshy walls, which puckered and steamed in response. The watchers stared on, their silent, multi-species gaze following the violence with placidity. "It's tracking the sound of our movements, our comms," I yelled, realizing its method. "Everyone, hold position." Walsh understood. He planted his feet, waiting. The sound hunter, momentarily confused by the lack of distinct targets, paused in the middle of the corridor, its head twitching, emitting another series of clicks. In that split second of stillness, Walsh fired. A single shot. The plasma bolt hit the creature dead center in its chest, where I theorized a central nerve cluster must be. The thing convulsed violently. Its legs kicked, its jaw snapped open and shut, and then it collapsed onto the deck. It lay still, a thin trail of acrid smoke curling up from the cauterized wound in its chest. "See, Doctor?" Walsh said, his voice laced with grim satisfaction as he lowered his rifle. "Threats are meant to be neutralized. Point, shoot, problem solved." He kicked the corpse, which lolled lifelessly. "Let's move." Mitchell nodded, his confidence returning. "Good work, Chief. Arthur, check on the boy." I ran a quick diagnostic on Samir, who was pale but unharmed. Peter retrieved his dented toolkit, his hand shaking. We had faced one of the escaped prisoners and we had won. The feeling was a fragile, welcome thing. We left the corpse where it lay and pressed on, deeper into the ship. The environment grew steadily more corrupted. The thrumming became more pronounced, and the air temperature continued to rise. We eventually came to a circular chamber that might have once been a cargo bay. Fleshy columns rose from the floor to the ceiling, like pillars in a living cathedral. A series of high-frequency clicks came from the far side of the chamber. "Another one," Walsh hissed, raising his rifle. "Get behind me. Same drill." We backed against a fleshy wall, weapons raised, our lights piercing the gloom. A silhouette emerged from behind one of the columns. It was the same size, the same build. But something was off. It wasn't stalking. Its movements were stiff, hesitant, like a marionette being worked by an unskilled puppeteer. It stepped into the light, and a collective gasp went through our comms. It was the same one. I could see the cauterized plasma wound in the center of its chest, the one Walsh had put there. But now, the wound was a puckered, angry mass of black, cancerous tissue. Veins like thick black wires contracted around the injury, burrowing into the creature's flesh. Its smooth grey hide was mottled with the same dark, diseased growth. And a thick, veiny cord, an umbilical of living flesh, snaked from the base of its spine back into the wall of the chamber. The creature stopped, its featureless head turned toward us. It wasn't hunting, it was patrolling, its maw unhinged. But instead of a hunter's shriek, a different sound came out. It was the sound of the ship itself, the deep vibration we'd been feeling, now vocalized through the throat of the dead thing before us. The corpse we had left in the corridor was now standing here, a puppet on a fleshy string. Walsh stared, his rifle lowered slightly. The simple, violent math that had governed his entire life, threat plus force equals solution, had just produced an answer he couldn't comprehend. He had pointed, he had shot, and the problem had come back stronger, uglier, and wearing the face of his own success. The puppeted hunter took a stiff, jerky step towards us, its head tilted as if listening to a command we couldn't hear. Walsh raised his rifle again, but his movements were uncertain. He could shoot it. He could probably even destroy it. But what then? Would two more grow in its place? "Don't engage," I said. "It's a sentry. It's not hunting us. It's defending its territory. Look at the umbilical." Everyone's helmet lights swiveled to the thick, fleshy cord tethering the creature to the wall. A sluggish current of black and deep red flowed through it. It was a vein, and it led somewhere. "We need to see what's holding the leash," I said. "We need to see the source." "The source? We need to find a way back to the airlock." "And run into a dozen more of these things? Blind?" I countered. "We have no schematics. Our only map is the one this thing is giving us. That cord leads to its heart, to the central nexus of whatever this is. Knowledge is the only weapon we have left, Captain." Walsh didn't argue. He just looked from the puppeted hunter to the umbilical. He understood. You can't win a war if you don't know who you're fighting. Mitchell nodded, a limp, defeated gesture. He had no other plan. We retreated, giving the sentry a wide berth. It watched us go, its head tracking our movements, but it made no move to follow once we were out of the chamber. We moved back down the fleshy corridor until we found where its umbilical cord plunged into the wall, merging with a thicker, cable-like artery of flesh. We followed it. It took us deeper into the ship's transformation. The architecture became more and more biological. Metal and bone gave way entirely to membranes and muscular-looking structures. The air, my suit warned me, was becoming a thick soup of complex proteins and methane. The thrumming grew from a sound I could feel to a pressure against my entire body. It was the beat of a monstrous hidden heart. The main artery we followed was joined by others, smaller umbilicals snaking from grates and vents, all merging into the larger whole. We were following a river of corrupted life, heading upstream towards its source. Eventually, the artery led us upwards along a curving ramp that opened onto a high, shattered catwalk. The metal was twisted and warped, and below us was a colossal cavern, the main cargo hold, the one the pods were built into, the place we had called Golgotha. From here, we could see all of it. My mind refused for a moment to process the sight. The cargo hold was gone. In its place, filling the colossal space from wall to wall, was a single entity. A mountain of living, breathing, twitching flesh. It was a nightmare mosaic of every creature that had been in the pods, all fused into one grotesque, continental mass. I could see leathery hides stitched to chitinous plates, reptilian scales flowing into patches of thick fur, all held together by the same black, cancerous tissue that had remade the Sound Hunter. Power conduits and coolant pipes torn from the ship's superstructure snaked through it like silver veins. Thousands of shattered stasis pods were embedded in its surface, jutting out like broken teeth. And the faces. From our vantage point, we could see them all. Thousands of the Watchers, their eyes staring blankly up at us from the heaving surface of the meat mountain. The thrumming that filled the ship originated here, from a dozen different points on its surface where huge bladder-like organs contracted and expanded. This was an ecosystem, a biomechanical engine powered by 1,000 fused life forms. It wasn't a riot, I heard myself say. There was no prison break. It was a fusion, a single catastrophic event, a plasma release, an energy surge. It must have breached every pod at once. It melted them. It cooked them together. Peter fell to his knees, his helmet pressed against the railing of the catwalk. "It's all of them," he choked out over the comms. "It's all of them, all at once, screaming." Walsh just stood there, his pulse rifle hanging limp in his hand. It was a useless tool, a child's toy in the face of this. But the worst reaction was Mitchell's. He said nothing. He simply stared down at the living, breathing mountain born from his ambition, the legacy he had so desperately craved. His face, visible through his visor, was a blank mask of utter soul-scoured despair. The captain had just met his god, and it was a teratoma the size of a stadium. We retreated from the catwalk, backing away from the horrifying vista of the living mountain. The image was burned into my mind. A heaving continent of flesh, the graveyard of 1,000 species made into a single, agonizing organism. We were inside it, a foreign body, a virus. And a virus, I knew, eventually provokes an immune response. "Back," I said, "the way we came. We need to find a path that leads away from that central mass." No one argued. The sight had broken something in all of us. Mitchell moved like an automaton, his eyes vacant behind his visor. Walsh was silent, but it was a tense, coiled silence now, the stillness of a predator that has just seen a bigger one. He was recalculating, and I knew whatever conclusion he came to would involve violence. We chose a new path, a smaller tunnel that branched away from the main conduits. It was darker here. "Light discipline," Walsh ordered. "Small beams only. Don't give anything a reason to—" His words were cut short by a strangled cry from Mitchell. The captain had stumbled, his boot catching on a raised fold in the floor. He fell heavily, his helmet light flaring wildly as he hit the deck. The bright, uncontrolled beam sliced across the ceiling. And the ceiling reacted. It happened in less than a second. A section of the membrane above us split open and a limb dropped down. It was a thick, cancerous arm of mismatched tissue, a pillar of raw, undifferentiated flesh, ending in a bulbous, hardened knot of what looked like bone and chitin. It wasn't purposeful. It was a spasm, a purely reflexive action triggered by the flash of light. It slammed down into the space where Mitchell's head had been a moment before, cracking the floor plating with a sound like cannon fire. Mitchell scrambled backward on his hands and knees, his breath a panicked gasp in our ears. The limb retracted as quickly as it had appeared, melting back into the ceiling, the fleshy seam closing behind it, as if it had never been there. "Hostile contact!" Walsh bellowed, snapping his rifle up and firing a burst into the spot where the limb had vanished. The plasma bolts chewed into the ceiling, which sizzled and secreted a foul, smoky fluid, but the damage was negligible. It was like shooting the ocean. "It's a reflex," I said, pulling Mitchell to his feet. "Don't shoot. You're just agitating it." "It tried to kill him," Walsh retorted, fury blazing across his features. He fired again. Another fleshy limb, smaller this time, whipped out from the wall beside him, lashing out at the sound and fury of his rifle. He dodged back just in time. "And you're making it worse," I said, shoving him back. "This thing isn't an enemy you can shoot, Mark. It's an involuntary muscle spasm. We are a foreign body inside a living organism, and we are triggering its immune system." Walsh rounded on me, his eyes blazing. "That's negative, Doc. I'm not sneaking through this hellhole waiting for the walls to eat us. We find a choke point, we consolidate our position, and we force the enemy to come to us. It's textbook." "There is no textbook for this," I shot back. "A fortress is just a stationary meal for something that can grow through the goddamn walls. Our only chance is to keep moving, stay quiet, and not provoke it." This was the breaking point. The schism. Walsh shook his head, a look of profound, contemptuous pity on his face. "You want to run? Run! I'm finding a place to hold the line." He looked at the others. "I'm a soldier. I know how to keep people alive. You want to live, you stick with me." He turned to Leo, who had been silent through the whole exchange, his engineer's mind trying to process the biological chaos. "Leo, there was a maintenance hub on the schematic near the primary cargo bay. Access tunnel M7, reinforced bulkheads, single entry point. A fortress." Leo hesitated, his eyes flicking between me and Walsh. He was a man of systems, of quantifiable stress tolerances and load-bearing walls. The idea of a solid, defensible room with one door was a powerful lure against the fleshy, unpredictable nightmare around us. "A hard perimeter," Leo murmured, nodding slowly. "Theoretically, it's the most defensible position." "Then you're with me," Walsh stated. Peter stepped forward, placing a hand on Walsh's arm. "Mark, the doctor is right. This place, it's not a battlefield. You can't fight a cancer with a gun." Walsh shook him off. "Save the philosophy for the eulogy, Cook." He jerked his head down a different corridor. "M7 is this way. We're leaving." He and Leo turned to go. No one else moved. Samir looked at me, his youthful expression caught between raw fear and trembling faith. Mitchell was still a ghost, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. And Peter just looked sad, as if watching a man willingly walk into his own grave. "Walsh," I said, a final attempt. "Don't do this." He paused, but didn't turn around. "I was a senior officer on Mars. I gave an order to open fire on a mob of rioters. My men lived. The brass crucified me for it. They said I should have de-escalated. You sound just like them, Doc." He took a step. "I wasn't wrong then, and I'm not wrong now." With that, he and Leo walked away, their bootfalls clanking down the corridor until they were swallowed by the gloom. I was left with a cook who saw sermons in slime molds, a shell-shocked kid, and a captain who was little more than a ghost in a uniform. My new command. And the weight of it was heavier than any planet. "Okay," I said, forcing the word out. My voice sounded thin in the confines of my own helmet. I was the authority now, a position I had never wanted and had actively fled for years. He made his choice. We make ours. I tried to think as the xenobiologist I used to be. How would a simple organism behave? It would protect its core. The growth, the transformation, would be densest near the central mass, the heart, and its primary energy conduits. The outer hull, however, would be the last place to be assimilated. It was the shell, structurally vital, but metabolically less important. We need to get to the outer hull. The environmental systems there might be more isolated. We could find a stable pathway, maybe even an intact terminal with a structural schematic. Peter nodded. A plan is a plan. Lead on, Doctor. He gently guided Mitchell forward. Samir stuck so close to my back, I could feel his presence as a pressure against my suit's pack. We began to move deeper into the unknown. The fleshy corridors shifted as an alien frequency bled into my comm system. It was psychic static, the background radiation of 10,000 captive minds screaming into the void. My skull felt compressed, squeezed tight. "Anyone else getting a headache?" I asked. "Like a nail in my skull," Peter confirmed. Samir just nodded. It was another symptom of the organism, a byproduct of its existence. It was poisoning us with its presence. We were experiencing the ship's agony as a migraine. After what felt like an hour of navigating the organic tunnels, I held up a hand, stopping the group. "I'm going to try them. One last time." I switched my comm to Walsh's dedicated channel. "Walsh, this is Arthur. Do you read? Report your status." The only answer was the hiss of an empty channel. I waited 30 seconds. "Walsh, Leo. Acknowledge." Silence. It was a dense, heavy silence that felt different from before. It felt final, like a disconnected call. We pushed on. The corridor we were in eventually opened into a wider space, a multi-level junction where several service conduits intersected. It was darker here, less assimilated. We could see the metal skeleton of the ship beneath the encroaching flesh. High above us, I saw a grated catwalk, and beside it, a vertical access shaft. "Up there," I said, pointing. "That shaft should run parallel to this deck. If we can get a high enough vantage point, we might see the maintenance hub from above." The climb was treacherous. The rungs of the ladder were slick with the same clear, viscous fluid the walls wept. Each step was a risk. Peter went first, then helped haul Mitchell up, the captain moving with a limp, terrifying docility. Samir and I followed. We emerged onto the catwalk. We were on a service gantry perhaps 50 feet above the deck we'd just left. We crept along it until we found a large ventilation grate set into the floor. It looked directly down into a boxy, self-contained chamber built into the side of the junction. Maintenance Hub M7. The lights on our suits illuminated the single reinforced door below. It was sealed. Barricaded from the inside with a heavy metal crate we could just make out through the door's small, armored viewport. The fortress had held. I knelt, peering through the grate. The hub wasn't empty, and it wasn't a scene of battle. It was full. The room had been filled like a mold, from the floor up, with the same black, cancerous biomass. It had seeped through every floor vent, every power socket, every microscopic seam in the plating. It was a solid, still-twitching mass of tissue that had consumed the space entirely. Embedded in the dark, translucent mass, I could see two shapes. They were vaguely human, like statues made of smoke. Flies in black amber. One was larger, thicker. Walsh. The outline of his rifle was still clutched in his hand, pointed at a ceiling that was no longer there. The other was smaller, slumped beside him. Leo. There was no blood, no sign of a struggle, just quiet absorption. They had died waiting for a fight that never came. The monster had simply seeped in through the floorboards while they waited. I pushed myself back from the grate. "What is it?" Peter asked. "What did you see?" I looked at him, then at Samir, who was watching me with an expression of pure animal terror. I chose my words carefully. Walsh was right. They didn't breach the door. The meaning hung in the air between us, more terrifying than any description I could have given. Peter closed his eyes. Samir let out a small, choked sob and pressed himself against the gantry's railing, as far from the grate as he could get. We descended from the gantry in silence. The lesson burned into us. In this place, a fortress was just a tomb you built for yourself. Our progress became a frantic push. The ship creature was entering a new phase. The low thrumming escalated into a series of violent, groaning convulsions that shuddered through the deck. Sections of fleshy wall would unpredictably bulge or contract. The psychic static in our comms intensified, punctuated by what sounded like overlapping whispers, the cognitive death rattle of 1,000 alien minds. The ship was in labor, preparing for some final, catastrophic birth. We navigated by instinct, always moving away from the thrumming heart, always seeking the metal. And we found it. A corridor, less corrupted than the others, ended in a familiar sight, the heavy utilitarian bulkhead of a docking junction. On the far side, less than 100 meters away, was the airlock, the one leading back to the Karen. Hope, sharp and painful, lanced through me. We turned the final corner, and the hope died. The corridor leading to the airlock was gone. In its place was a wall, a solid, writhing wall of living flesh. Hundreds of the cancerous, lashing limbs we had seen before were woven together into an impenetrable dam, sealing the passage completely. They squirmed and contracted, a single unified mass of muscle and chitin blocking our path to salvation. The thing was sealing its wounds. We were an infection, and this was the scar tissue forming to wall us off. We couldn't cut through it. It was too thick, too dense, and it would regenerate faster than we could inflict damage. We couldn't go around it. The ship was tearing itself apart behind us. This was the end of the line. Peter began to pray, his voice a murmur in the comms, a mantra against the psychic whispers. Samir slumped against the wall, his thin shoulders shaking with silent sobs. His datapad, clutched in his hand, showed the smiling face of his sister, a memory from a world that no longer seemed real. And then Mitchell moved. He had been a passenger for hours, a broken thing we pulled along. But now something changed. He pushed himself off the wall, his posture straightening. He looked at the weeping boy, at the praying cook, at the impenetrable wall of flesh. He looked at me. His eyes, which had been dull and vacant for so long, were suddenly clear. "Doctor," he said, his voice the captain's again, calm, measured, and authoritative. "Your analysis. It's impassable. It's the end." He nodded once, as if I had just confirmed a navigation vector. As I thought. He took a step away from us toward the writhing mass. "Captain, what are you doing?" He didn't answer me. He looked down at the control panel on his wrist. I saw the commands flashing on his screen. Power core, manual override, safety protocols disable. He was turning his suit into a bomb. "Mitchell, no!" He held up a hand, a universal gesture to stop. "For 32 years I've been a glorified bus driver, Arthur. My legacy was going to be a perfect attendance record and a pension. When I saw this ship, I saw a way to change that. I saw a footnote in a history book." He looked back at the wall of flesh. "I was wrong. This is my legacy, the lives of my crew." He turned to face us fully. "Get back. Get to the far end of the junction. That is my final command." He was no longer a man crushed by guilt. He was Captain James Mitchell of the cargo hauler Charon, and he was giving his last order. We scrambled back, pressing ourselves into an alcove as far away as we could get. Mitchell walked forward until he was only a few feet from the lashing limbs. He raised his arms. "This is the captain!" he roared, his voice broadcast over his suit's external speakers, a defiant shout against the thrumming of the universe. "All hostile entities, converge on my position!" The limbs sensed the building energy. They paused, then began to turn towards him. Over the private comm, his voice was a near whisper, meant only for me. Arthur, you were right. Now follow my damn order. Get your people out of here. He toggled off his comm. The light that erupted from his suit was brighter than a sun. A focused blast of pure, white-hot thermal energy. For a single, beautiful, terrible second, he was a star. The wall of flesh convulsed. Every limb, every twitching muscle in the mass turned from the airlock and surged towards the incandescent flare of energy. They swarmed him, burying him, absorbing him, tearing him apart in a feeding frenzy drawn to the heat and light. And where the wall had been, there was now a tunnel. A burning, cauterized, temporary tunnel, straight through the heart of the blockage. He had given us a path, but we had seconds to use it. Go! Now! Move! I screamed, my voice raw in my own ears. The tunnel Mitchell had bought us was a horror show. A smouldering, circular wound bored through living tissue. The walls sizzled, weeping black fluid and releasing a thick, hazy smoke that sent my suit's atmospheric sensors into a frenzy of alerts. The floor bucked and convulsed beneath our feet. We ran. There was no other thought, no other option. It was a pure animal flight, a desperate race through the closing throat of the beast. Peter was ahead of me, his usual calm shattered into frantic, pumping limbs. Samir was right behind him. I brought up the rear, my helmet light strobing over the twitching, regenerating walls. The tunnel was already shrinking. We were halfway there, maybe 20 meters from the airlock. The entire ship lurched violently to port, a tectonic shift that threw us all off balance. A sound like a breaking bone, magnified 1,000 times, echoed from the ceiling above. I saw it happen in the fractured strobe of my headlamp. A slab of the ship's original metal superstructure, a tangled mass of plating and conduits shaken loose by the convulsion, tore free from the ceiling. It fell like a guillotine. Peter scrambled clear. I threw myself sideways, my suit scraping against the hot, fleshy wall. But Samir wasn't fast enough. The metal slab slammed down, pinning his left leg to the deck. His scream was a thin, bird-like cry, cut short by the suit's internal safeties as it flooded his system with painkillers. I was already there, kneeling beside him. The sight was sickening. The metal had crushed his leg from the knee down, mangling the suit's articulated armor, and beneath it, the boy's own flesh and bone. Red alert icons flooded his diagnostic panel on my HUD. Catastrophic pressure loss, multiple fractures, critical biosign warnings. "The tunnel is closing," Peter shouted, his voice tight with panic. The walls were visibly constricting, the opening now half its original size. "Arthur, we have to go. We have to leave him." And there it was, the same choice. Not a theory, but a real, physical choice, right here in front of me. The airlock was 20 meters away. The walls were closing, a helpless person trapped. The math was the same. 2 lives for one. My life, Peter's life. His was already lost, the logical survivalist calculus, the same calculus I had used 10 years ago. For a second, the screaming ship faded away. I was standing outside the Genesis chamber again. The alarms were blaring. The grey, cancerous sludge was seeping under the door. And Nicole Rodriguez was on the other side, her hand pressed against the viewport, her mouth forming my name. I slammed the emergency containment lever down, sealing the bulkhead, condemning her to save the rest of the facility. It was the correct protocol. It was the right decision. And it had hollowed me out, leaving a space inside me colder and darker than the Oort cloud. "Arthur!" Peter's voice was a desperate plea. "He's gone! We have to go!" I looked down at Samir. His eyes were glazed with shock, but they were fixed on me, trusting me. The same look of helpless trust that Nicole had given me just before the lockdown shield had made her vanish forever. The tremor in my hands returned, violent and uncontrollable, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from rage. Rage at the universe for giving me the same test twice. "No," I said, the word a piece of gravel in my throat. I looked up at Peter. "Not again." I grabbed the edge of the metal slab. "Help me!" My suit's servo motors whined as I heaved, the muscles in my back and shoulders screaming. The metal barely budged. It was too heavy. "It's no good," Peter cried. "Help me!" I roared, putting every ounce of my will, my guilt, my 10 years of self-loathing into the word. Something broke in Peter's face. He knelt beside me, getting a purchase on the mangled plating. "On 3, he grunted. 1, 2, 3. We heaved together, science and faith. The medic and the cook. The metal groaned, scraping against the deck as we lifted it a few inches. It was enough. I hooked my arms under Samir's shoulders and dragged his limp body free. The ruined leg came with him, a mangled mess of fabric and flesh. The walls were only a few feet apart now, twitching and reaching. "Lift him," I gasped. "We're not leaving him." Together we wrestled Samir's dead weight between us, a horrifying 3-legged burden. We began the agonizing struggle toward the airlock, one painful, stumbling step at a time as the monster we were inside tried to swallow us whole. The final 20 meters were a descent into pure chaos. The tunnel convulsed around us, the fleshy walls contracting with a wet, tearing sound. We were inside a dying throat, being squeezed shut. Samir was a dead weight, his ruined leg leaving a smeared trail of suit sealant and blood behind us. The shriek in our comms was a physical thing now. The ship creature was screaming its birth pangs, and we were caught in the contractions. Then light. A clean, artificial light. The rectangular outline of the Golgotha's outer airlock door. "Almost there," I grunted. We practically fell through the opening, collapsing in a heap in the small metallic cube of the derelict's airlock. I slammed my hand on the control panel. The iris door behind us constricted one last time and sealed shut with a final sigh. The shriek in our heads was muffled, the violent shuddering of the deck lessened. "Inner cycle!" I yelled, fumbling with the controls for the Karen's airlock. With a hiss of equalizing pressure, our salvation opened, the familiar grey interior of our own ship. "Come on," I urged, getting my arms back under Samir. "Help me get him to the med bay." We hauled Samir's broken body over the threshold and onto the deck of the Karen. He was unconscious now, his breathing shallow. His suit was a write-off, but the emergency tourniquets had deployed, and his vitals, though critical, were stable. He was alive. I turned back to Peter. "Peter, grab the emergency trauma kit from the locker." But Peter wasn't behind me. He was standing on the other side of the threshold, in the derelict's airlock, his hand resting on the frame of the door. He was looking back through the small, reinforced viewport of the Golgotha's sealed outer door, into the fleshy darkness we had just escaped. "Peter, what are you doing? Get in here!" He turned to look at me, and his face, seen through 2 layers of helmet visor, was unnervingly calm. All the fear, all the exhaustion, was gone. In its place was a profound, heartbreaking peace. "They're so afraid, Arthur." "Who is afraid?" I asked. "There's nothing you can do for them. It's over." "No," he said, "it's not over. It's happening. They're being born into this." He gestured to the ship around him. "All those mines, all that terror. Someone should be here for the end. Someone should listen." It was madness. It was suicide. It served no purpose. "That's not your responsibility, Peter. Your responsibility is to live." He gave me a small, sad smile. "You found your purpose in there, Doctor. You went back for the boy. You chose to save a life." He took a step back, away from the safety of our ship. "I think I just found mine." He raised a hand in blessing. "You must go now. Live. Let that be your prayer. That's more than enough." Before I could say another word, he turned his back on us. He placed his hands on the derelict's inner airlock controls. The iris began to close, sealing him inside. I saw him for one final moment through the shrinking aperture. He was facing the darkness of the ship he refused to abandon, his shoulders squared, a shepherd waiting to greet his tormented flock. Then the door sealed. He was gone. I hit the master control for the Karen's docking collar. There was a series of explosive bolts firing, a violent clang of separation. The small viewport in our airlock showed only the empty black of space, as I sank to my knees on the metal deck, next to the unconscious boy whose life had cost us a captain and a saint. The medbay's lights are a soft white. The air is clean, tasting of nothing but itself. The only sounds are the rhythmic beep of Samir's heart monitor and the quiet hum of the auto-dock as it synthesizes another dose of broad-spectrum antibiotics. The diagnostic slab gives me the hard facts. His left leg was amputated just below the knee. The crush injuries were too severe. His other systems are stable, his fever contained. I set the bones in his right arm myself, the old-fashioned way. The autodoc could have done it cleaner, but my hands needed the work. They needed to feel something fixable. He will live a long life, but he will never run through a sunlit park with his sister. I saved him, but I couldn't save his dream. I wonder if he will thank me for that when he wakes up. I have to file a report. An official incident log for Magnus Interstellar. I've tried to start it 3 times. How do you describe the Golgotha in the language of a corporate form? How do you quantify the watchers? It's like trying to describe a scream by measuring its decibels. You capture the data, but you lose the meaning entirely. I'll have to list the casualties. Captain James Mitchell died performing an act of tactical self-sacrifice to ensure crew survival. That's what the report will say. The truth is, he was a man who saw a footnote in history and tried to write his name on it with a salvage claim, but found his penance in the last, desperate command of a captain saving his ship. His was a faith in protocol, redeemed only when he chose to break it. Security Chief Mark Walsh, lost during structural collapse. That's the lie I will tell. The truth is, he built a fortress of certainty and was devoured by a monster that refused to knock. He died because his textbook had no chapter on this kind of war. His faith was in the gun, and he was consumed by something that didn't even notice he was shooting. Engineer Leo Schmidt, lost alongside Walsh. He followed the logic of defensible space and died by a flaw in its premise. Cook Peter Sorensen. I don't know what I will write for him. Chose to remain on the derelict. It sounds like madness, but it wasn't. He was a man who lost his faith in a church and found it again in a cathedral of suffering. His God wasn't in the heavens. His God was in the choir of 1,000 silent, screaming minds. He didn't run from the horror. He walked toward it to offer a final ministry. His faith was in something I cannot prove or measure, but I saw its truth in his final, steady steps. And then there is me. Dr. Arthur Graves. I survived. I also faced a choice in a corridor of flesh. My faith, I realize now, has never been in God or in protocol, but in the hard data. And the data told me to run. For the first time in my life, I ignored it. I chose the illogical, inefficient, sentimental variable. I chose to carry the burden. I pick up Samir's datapad from the tray beside his bed. The screen is cracked, but the image is still there. His sister laughing in the sunlight. I will have to give this back to him. I will have to look him in the eye and tell him about Mitchell, Walsh, Leo, and the cook who stayed behind to listen to a song I couldn't hear. I will have to be the keeper of those ghosts. This is my penance. Not for the choice I made 10 years ago, but for the one I almost made in that collapsing tunnel. I leave the medbay and walk to the bridge. The pilot's chair is empty. The ship is on a slow, automated course back to the nearest system. It will take weeks. I stand before the main viewport. Outside, the stars are cold and sharp against the endless black. The Oort cloud is just a region of space, a collection of ice and rock. But I know what's out there now, tumbling in the dark. I can still feel the thrum of the ship creature in my bones, a phantom limb I'll carry forever. I find myself searching the void with the weary vigilance of a man watching a prison wall, hoping the monster inside never, ever gets out.